This is the Powered Up Podcast, show number 4.
My dream here is to plan a lesson or plan maybe even a whole unit where the student gets a certification at the end of it. And using like real text and real everything, but I want it to be something that is applicable.
Welcome to a real-world education with insight and advice from teachers in the game, where current and former educators reveal what truly sets apart the great teachers and what it takes to make a positive impact on students. Whether you're in pre-service learning, new to the game, or a seasoned veteran, this is the show for you. You'll leave feeling inspired to take action because we are powering education by empowering you.
Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Ken Ehrman, host of the Powered Up Podcast, and I'm here with my co-host, as always, Mr. Matt Horse and Buggy Rogers.
Oh, man.
Matt, how are you today?
You know what? I am doing great. How are you?
I'm doing very well, very well. So what I want to ask you before we jump into our show today is, what is one unique obstacle that you face with your students that would be very specific to your demographic and community?
That's an awesome question. And I think it's one of those things that luckily I don't face this challenge on my own. And I know we'll talk about a little bit in the interview later today, is where I teach deals with plenty of poverty and what I'll refer to as the forgotten community. I teach in a very rural, horse and buggy, Amish-centric school district. And so I think what you hear a lot, because it's high density, is urban populations and the challenges they face. But maybe not so much credit given for the rural population. I know where I teach specifically, we have one bus system that runs through the major part of town. So with a huge school district with maybe not that large of a total number of families and really spread out, if you cannot be close to the main drag strip in our town, it's difficult to get out of that town. So you have transportation issues, or you want to try a different career and you can't drive. If you're not close to the bus system, it's really difficult. I think that also kind of then ties into, right? So families tend to stay, and generation after generation are at my school, and sometimes they get frustrated with opportunities, or are they able to reach for hopes and dreams if they've been held back because of poverty. But what's incredible is our district, after really recognizing how much poverty and how limiting that can be in our location, have created so many sources of support for the community, and creating a school not necessarily just as an instructional hub, but a caretaking hub. I think it's interesting. We'll interview a much more qualified person to talk about rural education in a little bit, but to hear the perspective of bringing services to the kids, that's something that I know I've been just incredibly grateful for what my school district has done. I think the hardest limit is making sure that they actually use it.
Absolutely. And what I enjoyed about the interview that we just finished up is the focus is his rural community, but it's really a bigger topic, and that's your students and your community has specific needs based on where you're teaching geographically and demographically. And, it's really important to be aware of that, to be in tune with the community that your students live in. And it's what will help you become a more effective educator. My district is not the same profile at all as to what you and Wade talk about, but when you look at my district specifically, our district is very diverse in the sense that school by school, especially at the elementary level, is very different. Even at the middle school level, we have one high school. So we have those strong needs in certain areas in certain schools, and others don't have those, but they have different needs. And so, it's important for those schools to understand their micro community, and it's important for people at higher balconies to understand the very diverse needs of the individual schools. So our interview today is with Wade Owlett. It's a fantastic interview. Matt and I just finished it up. He just offered great nugget after great nugget. The look at his lesson was really interesting. He threw us a curveball, which was fun and unexpected. So Matt, anything that you want to add before we jump into our interview?
Well, I think it's a really cool opportunity because not a lot of teachers have the opportunity to see into the world of rural education, or even just the perspective of something that doesn't look like your classroom. And I think sometimes I only look for resources that match my classroom or my demographic, to have an open mindset to, hey, what can I learn from someone that's doing the same position with different circumstances? I found that even though I would consider myself a rural education teacher, not quite to the point as Wade. So really great interview, and enjoyed the listen.
Well, without any further delay, let's get into the interview with Wade Owlett. Wade, welcome to the Powered Up Podcast. We're super happy to have you here. How are you?
I am pretty well. How are you?
We're doing very well. So Wade and I first met at the 2019 PA Teacher of the Year Conference, where we were both recognized as not being the winner. But we did have an amazing experience together, got to know each other a little bit in sessions and just some fun activities together. From that point, I went on to do nothing and earn 0 accolades. However, Wade went on to be recognized as the National Rural Teacher of the Year. So, Wade, kudos for continuing on a prestigious path, unlike myself. But why don't you just introduce yourself and just give our audience a little bit of background on who you are and what you've done in your teaching career so far?
Sure. So I am a 5th grade teacher this year. I've taught elementary for about 15 years now. Don't do the math. That makes me older than I'd like to admit right now. So I've taught in rural Pennsylvania in the same classroom even the whole time. And we've gone through a lot of changes. I like to call them like generations of change. We've done like LFS, we've done mass customized, and lately, as everybody, we've been delving into the generation of virtual learning. But our school is about 300 students, so it's very small. It's K to 6, and I've just been teaching there. I teach ELA primarily. I do social studies as well, and that's kind of my little niche.
Excellent. So the first thing I think I want to dive into is this idea of the rural education, the area you teach, and obviously being recognized with that specialization in the award you received. And, to give some geographic perspective to our non-Pennsylvania listeners, Pennsylvania, you think of Philadelphia, you think of Pittsburgh, and you have surrounding suburbs which are highly populated, and you have a large center of the state that is much different from those bookends, especially as you get into Wade's area, which is the northern tip, very close to New York. So what is it about rural education or your area that is different for you, and it's different for the student experience?
So when we speak of rural education here in Pennsylvania, it is very different from the urban areas. When you look at resources available, especially, but also just kind of like work ethic and just community. It just looks a little bit different. Not better, not worse, just a little bit different. And so I think if I'm looking at my community and what we do and what we stand for, it's just a place where everybody knows each other and we're very connected. Um, yeah, I guess does that answer your question? I don't.
No, it does. And Matt, so you're kind of smashed between not 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 Philadelphia, but some higher populated areas in Pennsylvania, and your community is definitely a little bit more rural. So, you know, do you want to jump in here? How do you see that impacting your school and your classroom and the way it defines your community?
Yeah, so I mean, and Wade, please chime in if you feel like you either relate or don't feel the same way. I feel much like the rural area that I teach in is much the forgotten territory. So I teach in an area where it's in between Philadelphia, Harrisburg. If you get kind of to eastern Pennsylvania, you have like your Westchester, King of Prussia Mall area outside of Philadelphia, and you have Lancaster County, which is famous for its Amish population, and we are kind of like that commuting area in between that kind of off the what we call the main line in the Philadelphia area. So we definitely have many of the features of rural environment. So plenty of farmland, limited population. The difference I would imagine, Wade, is we have access within 20 to 25 minutes to a fairly large city in almost every direction that we would head. It just so happens that that kind of territory of our school district is pretty desolate in the sense of like community center, which has actually translated to a lot of effort through the community I teach in to develop a center, which is really neat. Just it's not naturally occurring from the I guess the structure of government or city.
I have a completely useless story to insert here before I ask you your next question, Wade. But it's in your area. So I boxed in college, and I was at Mansfield University, which I know is borders your district. I was there to actually support one of our other fighters. He was the only fighter the only fighter we brought, and he was the main event. So we had to weigh in at 9 a.m. and we had to wait till 9 p.m. for him to fight, and we didn't want him to sit around the gym all day. So we said, well, what can we do? Let's go see a movie. The closest movie theater we found was in New York State, and it was a single theater movie theater, which was much different than the experience that I grew up as a kid. So, when you were talking about your area, you mentioned difference in resources. So let's look at that from two lenses. 15 years ago, what was the difference in resources that you think your school district had compared to some of our higher populated areas? And then again now, what are those resources that are different because of the area that you live in?
So I think like before I answer that question, I looking at resources, another thing that sets our area apart, and not necessarily in a good way, is just the extreme poverty, and I think that is a really prevalent characteristic of rural areas as well. My school district is right around last year. I think it was like 60% poverty, but this year we kind of hit the jackpot, so to speak, and now we are 70%. So that comes with a little bit more funding, but it's just the devastation and disparity that poverty brings to rural areas, I think, is forgotten. So when I speak, I try to really bring light to that disparity and even the resilience in that. But so when we look at resources, then we aren't starting at zero like everybody else. We're starting at a negative number. And so we're trying to just get resources to bring us back up to that level playing field, to give our kids a chance. So looking at 15 years ago, I remember when I first started teaching, there wasn't even like a I want to say a fiber optic line where there could be internet even in the area. Like the school district was the organization that brought internet to just our schools. Like they funded it themselves, to just bring the internet. Like there wasn't internet when I first started in my school, and even now, 15 years later, we're still looking at that problem, with cell reception or internet, and as you know, I'm sure, looking at that disparity, we have children who aren't able to learn virtually because they don't have the internet, and it's not even like it's something that they could have but can't. It's like it's not even an option, like in our area for a lot of our children. So we see right now that gap really widening, and that's something that we're really trying to, I don't know, use the resources that we have and try to close that gap a little bit. But it takes that's a bigger thing going on at a larger scale, statewide. So all we can do right now is just kind of petition and hope for that change. Yeah.
Well, and I know from my end, being in a similar circumstances, so we're in that 50 to 60% range, and it's one of those where it is a maybe not well known enough challenge of that poverty. And I'd love for you to kind of, before we kind of dive into your career, get your perspective. I know you had the opportunity to come to our district and see some things, but one of the things that always sticks with me is our superintendent talks about having not necessarily realistic, but creating an environment where the kids have access to their first choice, recognizing that where we live and the resources we have, some of the kids may not go into college. So we have a huge sector that we create for career readiness. And I think just in the community that we have, similar to yours, that has to be a realistic perspective of what is that scope and sequence for. You may have them at the earlier stages in their career, but when it comes to that, we spend a whole lot of time talking about access and equality, and we included technology, but even the challenges of family members having the navigation skills to say, "Oh, here's a hotspot on the device. How do I get that to work to get online and participate?" is a huge barrier beyond just the idea of, hey, you sign on at this time and we'll take care of the rest. It's not a realistic possibility.
Yeah, I've been looking into, and this kind of came to me through a couple organizations with the National Rural Education Association, looking at like place-based education, and how like being proud of your place that you are really feeds back into kids or students or adults then coming back and bringing resources with them. And so that's something I've been kind of interested in lately is using place-based education as like the lens through which to teach curriculum. And so that's something I'm kind of like hawing over in my mind, and how to make that a reality.
If you had to define things that you value in instilling in your students when they're with you for the year, beyond the standards that are attached to your grade level that you're teaching, what would you define as those skills? Because I think that really varies, on this topic of where you're teaching, the population of students that you're teaching. I know that just from our time together, I know that you teach the whole child. I could tell that very quickly in our conversation. So, what would you say are some of those skills or characteristics that you really focus on for the school year when you're with your students?
Yeah, I think the most important thing that I try to focus on is consistency. So if we're looking at students who are at risk because of poverty or whatever, what they really need is a consistent person in their life. So that consistency I try to really focus on that and translate into showing the student that I care for them, but also that I'm going to show up and do what I'm here to do. Um, so yeah, just bringing that consistency and that stable person. So many of our students don't have stability or consistency in their regular lives. I've always just thought that was kind of my goal, to be that stable. I don't know. I always talk about how our classroom is a family. You guys probably do the same thing, but I talk about how I'm like it's my job to be like that stable figure in your life right now. So
That's fantastic,
yeah.
and I know Matt does it, and I was the same way, and I truly believe the best thing you can do as a teacher to make a student feel that way is to just be honest and actually feel that way. If you're putting on a show that you want to be that stable figure, but you're not actually there for them, they're gonna figure it out fast. But if you had to offer advice to, say, our newer teacher population, or just anyone that is trying to hone that skill a little bit more of really establishing effective classroom culture, are there any specific activities or skills or approaches that you take other than being real and honest and true to yourself?
Yeah, I mean, just be real and honest. Yeah, I think that's a good place to start, and just let yourself be vulnerable. Like I remember when I first started, and like I wanted to like have that stature or posture of a teacher. You guys remember what that was all about, and it's like
Absolutely.
it became evident pretty quickly that kids, first of all, they see through that, but also it's just not effective. So just like for a new teacher, be yourself, laugh at yourself, be goofy, let your voice crack. Like it's okay.
They don't have a choice. They have to come back tomorrow anyway.
Exactly.
So.
Yeah.
Very true. So you talked about some of your experience, and you mentioned mass customized learning. So I'd like to dive into that topic a little bit because I don't think a lot of people know what it is, and at the same time, others might know and want to understand more. So Matt, your district has been using it for a while. So can you quickly kind of just define what mass customized learning is from your perspective, and then Wade, why don't you jump in and just share kind of what that journey has looked like for your district?
Yeah, so mass customized learning. I know even in our district we struggled with the name because it sounds like an oxymoron. How do you, without creating an IEP for every single kid, how do you do that, but also realistically create opportunities that are specific to each kid? We're slightly larger than Wade. I have 400 kids in my building, but pretty standard classroom sizes, and the whole concept of MCL is creating a pathway that does not follow traditional brick and mortar 1940s or before classroom practices. So kids have the opportunity to excel in different areas that they find interest in. It really taps into their intrinsic motivation. If they really want to enhance their skills and progress through learning, because they're motivated, or they know that how hard they work determines when they finish a grade level, as opposed to just waiting 180 days and knowing that maybe next year you'll be challenged, and then come to the end of that year and hopefully next year you'll be challenged. the whole concept is creating opportunities where there's many check-ins for understanding, and it's built off mastery learning, where learners will prove that they understand the concepts that are put in front of them, as in variety of different ways, not traditional summative assessments that we are so used to, and just plug in towards the middle as classroom teachers. I know that's the big general shift. It really made a change in our high school. As I was mentioning, our high school has become almost like a ghost town through this, because we have so many kids leaving for real world opportunities, internships, and college opportunities, and working in the field. So that's where it then trickled down to the elementary level. Wade, you're welcome to jump on it. I can keep on talking, or maybe we'll just kind of talk back and forth about it.
Yeah, I think so. For us, it started with a complete overhaul of the curriculum, and I think that was probably the same for you.
Absolutely.
And that
Yep.
was a really long, tedious process, and looking at how those learning progressions build towards mastery of skills. And so when we did that, and we're a pretty small school as well, a small staff. That led into creating rubrics, and moving from a traditional number grade to a skill-based rubric, and so that progressed as well into reteaching, or educating the community on what that looks like and why that's useful, as opposed to a traditional number grade, and that was another long process, and then so it just kind of is a thing of its own. I think it's a very organic, living thing. All of our curriculum assessments and all of that just kind of take new forms every year based on the kids, and that's kind of cool. So yeah, I like it. It keeps it fresh for you as the educator, but it also keeps it meaningful for the student. So that's where we are.
So, from my perspective of someone who's never officially taught in mass customized learning, but someone who in my own classroom I was very focused on personalized learning, very much use those principles, but more on a on the fly, doing it myself, figuring it out myself kind of basis. How did you adjust to that change initially, and how do you think your colleagues did as well with this idea of really being non-traditional in so many ways?
Yeah, for me, I had to. So I use the analogy of, like, we had all of these things that needed to go in pigeonholes, but we had to build the pigeonholes first. And so for me, it was a really that initial part was a struggle of getting, not having the information, but understanding where the information goes. But once you start, it's kind of like a puzzle. Once you start getting the pieces together, and you start to see the big picture, then it gets easier and easier.
Yeah, and I would also add, I think, just to give context to the listeners. So one of the hard part was getting rid of titles. I was no longer a fourth grade teacher. I was a facilitator responsible for a range of curricular items. And that may change. I may be teaching sixth graders one day and third graders a few days later, in all realistic times. And one of the hardest parts for us, besides the curriculum shift, was the schedule. And so our building adopted essentially two major groups, the primary and then it's weird to say secondary, but kind of the second half of upper elementary. And we were kind of at that precipice of really jumping into blurring those lines. And I think, Wade, you got a little bit further into that than we did. We really got into mixing third and fourth grade students pretty well, and creating opportunities for high fourth graders to move into fifth grade curriculum. But I've never experienced, and I'd love for you to talk about this, I've never experienced data and the resources be so valuable so quickly in instruction, that it was a combination of really beneficial to know your learners, but also really important to know who you're working with next week.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah. So, and that I would say also our population is so small that you kind of could predict that a little bit. But yeah, using that data um, to build your class for the next curriculum, yeah, that was a challenge as well. But it was fun too. Like it just like I always liked that because it was like a whole new challenge or a new like way of teaching for the next skill set. So that was fun too, and it also like it lent itself really well to teaching classroom procedures and expectations. So you were always kind of reviewing that as your students changed as well, and so you had less behavioral issues as well.
Absolutely. And just to touch back to Ken's question about kind of the experience, and I know you were talking about from your end in the classroom. I think the concept you have to wrap your head around is so much less attached to the current curriculum you're used to, and it allows for some creative thoughts. But the main thing that I got as we kind of dove into MCL was I knew that I was addressing my kids' needs so much more, and everything that I was doing was utilizing kids' learning opportunities so much wiser. And really, what I mean by that is I may have a few third graders, a few fourth graders, and a few fifth graders, but I can feel pretty confident that they're all around the same learning status on a certain concept, that I'm not necessarily expanding to accommodate all different levels, but really focusing on the skills. And I felt like I was really drilling down. My past is learning support, so it felt like very focused learning every moment. And I unfortunately am talking about it past tense right now because it's not as easy to do, but once we're able to get back to it, it just is. Every moment that you're teaching, you feel like all the kids are around the same level, regardless of how old they are. And that is just so invigorating as a teacher to say, hey, I have kids that I know are all the same level. Not that I'm ignoring this group because I'm having small groups. It's, hey, everything I do is really purposeful.
I would agree. And then also like that top end was super fun too because you got to do so many acceleration things and like projects, and yeah, that was fun.
The bottom end, sorry to cut you off, is realistically your behavior issues are based off either frustration or boredom, right? That's a view that I often see. So your frustrated kids are the ones that feel like they're not getting learning at their level. So they're placed in an environment that if they can kind of accept a school-wide mantra of this is something that we're adopting, and either A, you kind of get on train and you work hard and you push yourself out of that, or I'm not singled out because where I'm at, and the vice versa, the boredom isn't the case because they're in control of their own destiny and they can accelerate, like you're saying, and have really neat opportunities.
I don't know if it's relevant or not, but when I visited your school, I remember Matt, I remember all your students knew their, I don't know, some sort of score and they all knew it, and they were so excited to like go to the next, try to get that score up or down. I'm not explaining it very well, but I remember that being really meaningful to the students, and I thought that was cool.
Yeah, so there's in the different elementary as well as upward, there's just kind of, it's almost like I prefer to refer to it as a percentage of like how far you've gotten, but consider it very similar to like a Lexile level of where that would fall. they recognize kind of their ranking, and all their materials kind of have that. We have some color coded systems related to whichever level. I could almost use the martial arts belt kind of analogy to it, but it's not something to be ashamed of by any means, but it's very obvious of where they're heading for their different materials. And every time we have these opportunities to kind of prove understanding or level up, it is a huge production in that sense of, hey, here, this is how far you jumped, this is how far you've come, and it's a huge celebration. And that's, I think, the absolute very coolest is them being aware, them being cognizant of how much effort they put in and where it translates to, and just the whole school-wide acceptance for really promoting everyone, regardless of who your homeroom teacher is, to keep on getting better, and the possibilities that they have based off their effort.
So it really sounds like the what's great about this is the systems of the mass customized learning are creating really effective, bigger picture differentiated groups versus me looking at my 30 kids and differentiating in my classroom. So what I want the two of you to do is offer advice to teachers that are not in a mass customized learning district, but they want to differentiate more effectively. They want to really try to personalize the experience for the students where, these 5 students, they can get to the end of this unit while the other 3 or the other 10 or these 5 are in the middle, or they're still on lesson 1 because they're struggling with this skill. They really want to try to reach more of that personalized experience. So what are some specific actions or strategies that they can use to be able to effectively teach in that way?
So I would say, first of all, you would need to focus on mastery of a skill. So that's kind of the whole concept is this whole idea of mastering a skill and taking the timetable off of it. So however you're gonna figure out that they've mastered the skill, that's I guess the crutch of it. But then from there, I think you could do a couple different things. I liked to use hybrid grouping in my classroom. So even in that kind of ability group that I was teaching, I would still break it down again into like 3 subgroups that I could use, that I could differentiate, and just change up the way I'm instructing and the way I'm assessing.
Use the traditional independent, collaborative, and instruction.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, and just to kind of jump off yours, I think so. Curriculum and understanding mastery is huge. I also think that creating student profiles and portfolios are huge. I had an observation once that I'll remember. Actually, the principal, Wade, that we were talking about, who said, "You're doing a huge disservice by the kids not visualizing their progress." And so it really hit home that they don't understand what numbers mean. And it was really simple for fluency. Okay, this week or this month, and we go and we graph it, but they don't necessarily understand, or at the elementary level, looking at a grade book doesn't translate. They don't remember what they had last week, or what these activities translated to a better or worse score. So I think one of the things that we emphasize is, and one of our 5th grade teachers heard about MCL, absolutely loved it, and just took off with it and created student profiles that would kind of self-log, and you would take, here are the standards for each grade level, and kind of, for a nerdy example, use an amortization schedule style, right? Like how quickly can you work through this skill set to get to where you want to be. And so that profile of their math concepts with mastery, their reading concepts, their writing skills as the main 3 were really cool to see in visual form, and to have these portfolios that I mean, it changed everything about our learning. We went from in-person parent-teacher conferences to student-led conferences, and the kids created, and we talked about this, Ken. It was a huge opportunity for student choice to come through as the kids identifying how they wanted to prove their learning, and realistically, us using, Wade, as you were saying, a rubric of identifying did it meet the competencies that were necessary? Did it achieve, but allow freedom and flexibility from the kids to explore their own creativity? Go back against the old Ken Robinson TED talk of, are we creating these opportunities that really bring out the personality of each kid?
The one thing you both talked a lot about that you didn't just mention now, but it was natural in your conversation when you were talking about MCL in your districts, is the use of data. You both referenced it multiple times, and if your district is not making concerted efforts to use it, or they're collecting data in a format that doesn't really seem to benefit you on the classroom level, I would highly encourage to really just keep it simple for yourself and do an exit ticket every day. Try to use some sort of tool like a simple Google form or Socrative or those formative tools that are out there to automatically grade it for you. And the other piece of that is put 10 minutes in your lesson and just call it exit ticket support or something like that. And I would put this in my plans in every subject, every class. And I knew I had 10 minutes set aside in my lesson where I was going to do something based on the results of that exit ticket. It might be a, wow, nobody in my class understood what I taught today. So those 10 minutes, everybody is going to review this with me. Or it could be, these 3 kids didn't understand it. I'm going to pull them for 10 minutes. But just doing even a single question exit ticket on a daily basis and building in that time to have it there is a great way to start towards that idea of really using data to differentiate with your students. So I kind of want to shift gears and circle back to the conversation that we were on before, Wade, with your community. Does your district do anything, or your school do anything in terms of focusing on the whole child or SEL or programs like that to really try to support the students in addition to the curriculum?
Yeah, so we partner with some faith-based organizations and some initiatives in our area to supply, like I said, resources, actual physical resources like shoes and clothes to our students, and food. And we do have a full-time counselor as well that works in our school and provides a lot of mental health programs for our support. Yeah, there you go. For our students. But a new one that we have this year, which is pretty cool, we've partnered with I think it was UPMC, and they are bringing in an actual doctor once a week, so that students can meet with a doctor and check prescriptions or whatever, so that they can get kind of that health care that was missing for a lot of them. We have a mobile dentist, which is pretty cool. Maybe you guys have that too, but it's a program where students can see a dentist at no charge as well. So
Yeah, there, and that's the thing that I think is amazing is slowly but surely. I mean, it's very publicized, the needs in urban environments, and I don't want to downplay easier or harder, but the rural environments get what seems to be left in the dark so much more, and part of it is it's so difficult to get around. It takes so long to get even from school district to school district. And I remember my interview with the district I'm with saying that our school district is almost 100 square miles, and we have something like, I don't know, less than 1,000 kids in the entire district. And it's just an outrageous size to have such a small population. Where I grew up, 1,000 kids could push a single building pretty easily. And so I know from my end, when you talk about these services, and even your role in the classroom, I know that you joyfully did not kind of classify yourself as a grade level teacher, which is traditional in MCL. But I think what did you feel, specific to where you live, were added benefits or added challenges by being so much more than just an instruction provider, especially for so many years in either traditional classroom or even this MCL kind of version? What were those added challenges by being in the rural environment that you felt specifically you needed to deal with?
I think I think right off the bat, I needed to uh, prove myself to the community. So it's a community that's local to me. I grew up really close to it, but I didn't go to school in that community. So I had to kind of be initiated into that community. And that was a challenge in itself. But then I think once you have that trust from the community, it's very rewarding because parents will come to me and ask me for advice or whatever for their kid, and I have no issues with parents um, who they're always looking for the best for their kid, and so they'll come to me and ask for advice, and I never have a problem. They never have a problem with what I recommend. So if I say a kid needs counseling or whatever, I never get any pushback anymore. So I think the advantage of staying in that community long enough to build that trust and prove yourself comes with the advantage of I don't know, being able to be part of that community and offer as much support as I can.
I think that's fantastic, and what I love that you're talking about is even if you're not teaching in a rural area or an urban area, which are very different, but all, at the same time are very similar in terms of high needs for students. You teach in let's say, a much more prosperity. That's not the right terminology, but the high income area. Um, every kid has needs at home, whether it is, not enough attention from parents, or parents are busy, or short-term things where somebody is sick, or parents are there's a million things that could be going on at home, and our jobs are so stressful and busy that it can be very easy to forget about what happens from 4 p.m. until 8 a.m. the next day. Those hours that the students are not in front of you. And I just think it's really important for everybody to remember that, regardless of the outlook of your community, is that these students have lives outside of school. And that life can have a huge impact on their behavior, on their academic success, and really what they need from you in general. And although it's not our job to know every detail of what's going on at home, it is our job to be aware of how the student feels that day, and to really make sure that you are making a concerted effort to stay connected with the students. And I think you've offered a lot of great strategies and specific insight into how you can do that. So if it's okay with you, Matt, I'd like to transition into our next segment of the show. We're gonna take a deeper look at one of your lessons, Wade. So we're gonna ask you 6 questions back and forth to just try to get a picture of something that you've taught in your classroom. This could be your favorite lesson, your student's favorite lesson, or one that you just think our audience would really enjoy to learn more about. So the first question is this a single lesson, or is it more of like a unit overview kind of long-term project?
Okay, so I'm gonna take your question and I'm gonna kind of flip it a little bit, just so you know. I know you're not expecting this, but this will be okay. Just trust me here.
I trust you.
So I'm gonna switch it in that I have this dream lesson that I want to teach, and
I love it.
I had it all ready to go last year, but then we were off in the spring and it didn't work, and so I'm kind of gonna, if it's okay with you, I want to talk about that, but also I want a little bit of your input too. So is that fair?
I think that is a fantastic
Is that gonna
idea.
work?
I'm
Okay.
really excited, and it just goes to show that it's so important to ask for advice, ask for ideas, bounce ideas off your colleagues. If you have instructional coaches in your district, even the 2020 Rural Teacher of the Year National is still asking to brainstorm. So there's no pride in education. All right, so it's a lesson you are hoping to do. So I'll repeat my first question.
Let me set it
It,
up for you. Yeah, if that's okay.
yeah, go ahead.
All right. So when I won the national award, I was able to speak in Colorado and had an amazing experience. And so on the plane back from Colorado, I sat by this man, and he was studying this book, like this manual, intently, to get his hunter safety course certification. And I was like really like trying to figure this out, and he was just so intent about it. And so the more I like kind of observed the situation and what was going on, I thought, this is exactly what I'm asking my kids to do on their own. But I'm using like texts and stuff that they just don't care about. And here's this man who's like studying hard this nonfiction text, all of the diagrams, all of the things on his own, so that he can get a certification, right? And so my dream here is to plan a lesson, or plan maybe even a whole unit where the student gets a certification at the end of it. And so, and using like real text and real everything, but I want it to be something that is applicable to elementary, because I teach primarily this year fifth grade. So I'm fifth grade is kind of like that year of hunter safety course stuff. So my initial plan last year was to bring in a speaker, and have them go through the whole hunter safety course, get the manual, and end up with a certification that they can use. And so I brought it to a couple colleagues, and they found a couple other certifications like babysitting and first aid that could be done as well. So that's my idea. I think it could be super valuable, and it gives students something that they can take with them forever.
That's
What do
awesome.
you
Yeah,
think?
phenomenal.
I'm really excited about that idea. That's and I want to dive into a little bit more. So
Yeah.
you kind of already answered Matt's question.
Do you want? Should we deviate from your questions? I know, Ken, you love sticking to this format, but should we just talk about
Considering
the
we've
lesson?
only done it a couple times, yeah, I'm super passionate about the format. No,
Well,
we can deviate. So, but actually, Matt, your second question I think is very appropriate right now. So why don't you go ahead and ask that?
well, related to kind of this awesome certification program, I think the next question has to be related to kind of what subject area would this really be aimed towards? I know under the MCL kind of concept, we spend a lot of time trying to um, uh, wrap a lot of different curricular areas into one. And I'm assuming that you would kind of pull in a bunch of them into this. But I know grade level, it's pretty specific with you. And time of year, I know a lot of times we look at the end of the school year when we can do flexible things. But I guess mainly related to hitting all of your content standards and all of the requirements for this activity. Where would you say subject wise you would focus on?
I think I would narrow it down to reading and understanding nonfiction text. I think that's a life skill that is applicable and it could go across subject area. So that would be, yeah, that was my idea.
That's actually, I'm glad you asked that question, Matt, because I think that's such a great perspective for teachers to hear. As someone who constantly did crazy things like this, I really was able to justify almost all of it to a specific standard, like you just said. And they're going to be so much more engaged on that standard than with the traditional style of what you would typically do. Right. So you kind of already talked about your objectives for the lesson. So I'm gonna steal Matt's next question. What do you envision your class looking like, and more specifically, the students? What do you when you're gonna carve out the time for this? What do you envision the students doing when they're in your class?
So, what I envision is more of a seminar based instruction with maybe even like breakout sessions of deep dives into the informational text and studying it.
I love it.
I love the idea of the kids being in a seminar type scenario where they're getting access to the instruction that they really need, and it really kind of embodies the MCL way. Kind of continuing on that side of things. I know most importantly for us, we care about the kids, but we also have to consider what are the facilitators, the teachers doing in this scenario, and I guess that comes down to through this student-driven activity what do you see your role as the instructor for this activity?
Yeah, I think my role then would be to check for understanding and like hit those levels of mastery because that's where you have to try to be careful with this because you do want all of your students to master this and get that certification. So you have to, I think, kind of develop some sort of gate that leads to that mastery, so that you don't leave a kid who thinks they're going to get the certification and then leave them devastated that they don't. So yeah, or like come up with some sort of, I don't know, alternative thing. I yeah, that's the tricky part. But yeah, for me and my role in the classroom, I think that would just be that checking for understanding and making sure everybody's kind of on the right path.
Are you a certified hunter yourself?
Yeah, I am. Yes.
What about first aid?
Yes. Yep.
What about babysitting?
No, I'm not certified in
Well,
babysitting.
as a teacher, are we certified to babysit? You're a teacher and a father, so I'm pretty sure you've been grandfathered into that. But the reason I ask that is, what if a teacher's listening to this says, "I love this. I'm doing this next week." Should they feel like they have to be certified in everything that their students are potentially going to pursue?
I don't think so, but I think like why not yourself? Like why not you get it as like with your kids? That's what I would say. Like when I got my hunter safety certification, my dad did it with me, and I remember the game officer being like, sir, you already have this. You don't need to do this, and he was like, no, I'm gonna do it again because my kid's doing it, so we're doing it together. Um, so yeah, I'd say yeah, I would do it again, whatever the certification was.
That's great. So our last question, and Matt, I'm gonna spin this a little bit. Our last question is typically you're talking about a lesson that you have done, and we want you to offer advice to yourself for the next time that you teach it. So instead, I'm going to turn this question to Matt and I'll start with you, Matt. Based on the ideas that Wade has given us, what advice do you have for him to pursue and tackle this awesome idea?
Before I give advice, I guess I want to kind of narrow down real quick. Wade, when you've been dreaming of this activity, have you considered trying to do something that everyone's doing an independent study, or kind of narrow it down that you kind of select a few of the activities you'd like the kids to work through, and they're selecting amongst those options? I guess I'll ask that before providing any advice.
Yeah. So initially we thought, and I'm speaking on behalf of my team members too. This isn't just me. But initially we thought everybody just for ease of trying to figure this out, everybody doing the same. But as we started to look at resources that we had available, we thought we could give them a choice of like those three, um, and that would at least give them some choice in the matter. So
So I asked that question about narrowing down because I think that's an important thing that we get lost in too many times. And uh, I think of it frequently when thinking about things like flipped classroom. I am an all or nothing person. So I want it to represent exactly my dream the first time out, even if that's at the sacrifice of my sanity, it seems sometimes. Um, I think a few of the things when tapping into this is there are things you have to consider. First off, narrow it down at first. And I know it's kind of sacrificing it for the first time going through with the kids, providing less choice, less freedom, which we want to provide them, but allows you to navigate the pathway of what is successful and what is not successful in a huge new activity for your kids, which allows you next year to come back or the next time you have the opportunity to teach this activity to feel comfortable to expand and expand and expand. And the other main thing that I would have to um, share is to tap into your resources. Obviously, Wade, for your scenario, you have a great pulse of your community. But for anyone listening, realistically, it comes down to uh, tapping into the resources available in your classroom, within your school, within the community. It's unbelievable how people rise for something that is meaningful and going to benefit kids in that local area. Um, whether it might be a parent works at a factory that has extra of this material, or this mom works in a program that has their own certification program that you didn't know about. I think the amazing thing is we as teachers try to manage everything and we feel like we need to build everything from scratch. And too many times there are much easier, much quicker solutions. And to be honest, much better solutions, authentic, maybe a little less work for us. I think that's a huge thing too. If someone will take something off our plate, that allows us to focus our energy on other things. So between that, the idea of like starting small and building up to what you ideally want, as well as kind of opening up your doors to allow other people to have hands in what this becomes, because I can absolutely see a dad or a mom or a grandfather or an aunt or an uncle chipping in to help kids achieve a goal. Because who doesn't find that satisfying and worthwhile? And especially if they have added connections to hardware stores or specialty programs or government officials, these type activities that are meant to help to bring that into our own classroom, especially for an activity like this where the kids can go out and find their own passion. I think it allows it to be one of you and many of them, and kind of crowdsourcing altogether to really benefit the end product as the main focus at the end of it.
yeah, I like that.
So I have two very different pieces of advice. My first would be similar to Matt's. Is I was going to ask the same question. Is I would encourage you to try to give them as much choice as possible in the certifications that they can pursue, because I think that your idea started with this man who was so intensely diving into this hunter certification, and he was so intensely doing that because he wanted the certification. So that's at the heart of this project, is that desire. So the more choice you give, the better opportunity you're going to give to those students to have that passion. Even I was thinking the first thing that popped in my head was a Google certification. I mean, how cool would it be for a student to have a Google certification? Who knows what they could do with it? They might be able to support other adults that need help with that. There's the possibilities are endless, and so I would be confident in allowing them to pursue things that you're not an expert in. Kind of like you said, pursue it with them if you want to. It's kind of funny way we were talking about this before the interview. I had students of mine 2 years ago actually work with Wade's wife, who is a teacher, teaches French. And I did a Genius Hour project in my classroom that spanned the year. And I had two students that wanted to learn French, and it eventually turned into them writing a children's book that had a story behind it, but the goal was to teach kids some French. Well, I don't know any French. And so I met Wade, and I actually connected and Skyped with his wife, and she taught them a little French, checked all their wording and stuff. So just the idea that like this lesson is such a fantastic idea. Try not to limit it as much as possible. But you also have to be comfortable yourself. Maybe the first time it's somewhat limited, and then you realize like, wow, I can open this up to anything. My second piece of advice would be when they're working, and you talked about their role and your role, really focus your role on what you're an expert at, and that's teaching the curriculum. It's teaching the nonfiction reading skills. It's teaching that reading for understanding, all those things. You can utilize a lot of the same mini lessons that you have already. Let the students become experts of other things. Like, you have someone that's really good at finding research articles or finding resources, or you have someone that's really good at maybe taking notes in a certain program or whatever that is, and encourage the students when someone asks you a question, Mr. Owlett, how do I do blank? And it's not that curriculum focus. You can say, hey, you know what, go talk to Johnny because he's the expert in doing that. And it'll really invigorate this more empowering learning experience in your classroom that I've seen with projects that are kind of similar in the idea that the students were able to figure things out on their own. And it creates a really powerful learning environment when the students start to feed off of each other, especially when you call them an expert of blank. So those would be my two pieces of advice. I got to say, no matter what, my only true advice is make sure you do this project because this is awesome. This is really, really awesome. And Matt, you need to do it too.
I agree. I would be lying if I wasn't sitting in through this interview thinking about how I can incorporate into my own classroom some of these suggestions and activities because it is an awesome idea. And I think what we always strive for is authentic learning environments. So something that the kids are going out, finding something they're passionate about, that intrinsic motivation's high. Yeah, I foresee myself pulling some of these features into my classroom. I'd love to hear how it turns out for you and share how it's going with me.
Definitely. Very good. All right. So we're going to transition into our last segment called the exit ticket. And so we're going to ask you four questions, same four questions we ask all our guests. And the first question is, what is the best thing a teacher can do to make a student's school experience better?
Yeah, so I think every year I go over this poem by Justin McRoberts, and it's really quick. It's really short. It says, "It is in no way an exaggeration to say that we change lives and even save lives by showing up and doing what we promise to do." So I think, like going back to your question, I think the most important thing we can do is to show up and do the thing that we promise to do. And if we ask that of ourselves, we can ask that of our students, and that just creates a culture of learning and respect, I think.
All right. So you've obviously had some great advice to get to the point that you're at right now. The question is whether it is from another colleague, a supervisor, or even a student, what is the best advice that you feel like you've ever received that has made a direct impact in your classroom?
Um, I think thinking about that, like going back to um, like college professors, I think they always said you get out of it what you put into it. So I think that would be the best advice. Um, that was the question, the advice, right? Um, that I would give. Yeah, yeah, to like yeah. You'll get out of it what you put into it. And I tell students that too, especially now with virtual learning.
That's great, Wade. Thank you. Third question is, we know how the school year can go in waves where there's just times of days or weeks where it's just a huge struggle. Everything is piling up on us. It's becoming stressful. What is something that every educator needs to hear to power up in that moment of struggle?
Um, I think right now what I'm telling a lot of my colleagues is you just do your best. You know, like it's a weird year and it's a hard. There are a lot of hard parts of this, and but nobody can ask you to do more than your best. And so if you're doing your best, it's enough. And don't let anybody tell you that your best isn't enough. So that's what I would say to somebody having a hard day.
So, as you can tell through this episode, Wade, you have shared some awesome things. I think most importantly, we want to know, how do we keep in touch, see some of your great ideas, follow along with some of the things you're working on in your classroom, and just kind of tune in to what's going on in your world. What's the best way to get in contact with you, social media, etc.?
Yeah, so I use Twitter pretty regularly and professionally, and that's at Wade Owlett. I also have a classroom Instagram that I'm not as good at keeping up with, but that is at Wade Owlett as well. I think I'm speaking this June at a conference. I'll have information on my Twitter for that as well. So yeah, I think that's probably the best way. Or email wade.owlett@gmail.com.
Wade, thank you so much. This interview has been outstanding. I really enjoyed our time together. You've shared some real insights into your community and the needs that your community has, as well as how you and your school district are providing that to the students, as well as some great actionable tips for our classroom. And I'm super excited about the lesson that you shared with us, and I can't wait to find out how that goes and be involved throughout the process as you tackle that later in the school year. Wade's information that he has provided will all be linked on this podcast show notes page, and you can find that at powereduup.com/show4, powereduup/show4. Wade, thanks again. For all of our listeners and viewers, if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button, whether you are listening on your podcast network or you are watching on YouTube, and consider doing the opposite of what you are currently doing if you want to enjoy the show in a different way. Also, please, if you have not already, join our community of educators, myself, Matt, and Wade, and all of the other educators on powereduup.com. Become a free member today. Start engaging in the forums, asking questions, sharing lessons, sharing ideas, and really growing your PLN as we grow that network together. You can find us on all of our social media platforms, on Instagram, Twitter, all at powereduup. And we appreciate you listening today. We appreciate that you're coming back each week to us, and we look forward to connecting again. So, Matt, why don't you take us on out of here?
As we power down this episode, hopefully we leave you feeling extra powered up. We'll talk to you next time, guys.